Hour 2 of Brian's Beat on New Bedford's News Talk Station, 1420 WBSM. I am Brian the Cab Driver. I get to play me tonight, and I can hardly wait. Here we are, 2 Wednesdays before Christmas, 2 Thursdays before Christmas, 2 Fridays before Christmas, 2 Saturdays before Kwanzaa. And I know that Hanukkah is underway, or it might be over. I don't know. It's over? Oh. Where's my candle? Okay. All right, here we go. Monday, December 14, 2015. Page A3 of the Standard Times. Kathleen McKiernan, who talked to our guest in studio. Her article proposed sober house could rest on single-family use. Now, I know certain people are saying, Brian, you're really extending yourself with this story. Well, you're right, because, yesterday was Bill of Rights Day. But besides that, I see someone, and maybe I have rose-colored glasses on. Sorry, I don't have any glasses on. At any rate, I see someone who is trying to help himself. No problem with that. He's doing it legitimately. He's trying to help other people. He's been doing this for a little while now. I'm not trying to make an ant out of a molehill. 6 months is a little bit of time. Probably 7 months now.
It is.
And I see someone who's also trying to, and I know you're going to say, what the hell are you talking about? But he's trying to enrich a community. And I think the fourth tier here is, if it can work for Stephen Sheldon, then quite possibly it could work for others, considering the housing lot in the city of New Bedford and the housing glut that is also in the city of New Bedford. Let's welcome back into the studio Stephen Sheldon, who is the owner of 49 Hawthorne Street in New Bedford. Hello.
Hi, and thank you.
Welcome back. Get a little bit closer to the microphone. It doesn't bite.
Hi there.
What happens on the other end could bite. But at any rate, how are things going? We've had you on the air a couple of times now, and you had 2 meetings, one with city councilors at a public type meeting, another where a few city councilors came into the Ashley Room over at City Hall. Where are we now on December 16th?
I've sent a letter for reasonable accommodation to the city. What does that mean? Reasonable accommodation is asking to the city to allow us to open up and operate ADF housing with 8 to 12 people in the home, and it allows a home like this to open in a residential area. So the reasonable accommodation is associated with people with a disability.
All right, so for those that may not know, what is Residential A?
Residential A is part of the zoning code of the city of New Bedford, and every town has a residential zone, which allows for single-family zoning.
Okay, but you said A as opposed to just residential. What does A mean?
In the city of New Bedford, residential A is single-family only housing, and I'm not exactly sure of the other classifications, but they will allow multifamily housing in it. So they may be residential in nature, residential A, B, and C, and maybe someone can clarify the other ones, but they will allow multifamily housing in the other zones.
So the headline to the article that Kathleen wrote the other day, proposed sober house could rest on single-family use. You're talking 8 to 12 people. I'm just going to use the conservative figure of 8 for a second. Chances are you're not going to have 8 people that are related by blood, adoption, marriage. So how does your housing fit in here?
It fits in because there's always there's 2 definitions of a family, and to have a residential zone, one must always have 2 definitions of a family. One is, as you stated, by marriage or blood, and the other is by number. And so the city of New Bedford has said that the number for residential A is 2 people. Anything more than that does not fit into the residential A zone, except for by this method called reasonable accommodation, where if the home is being used in that way, and it's quite a bit broader than this, but we can look at it for sake of conversation. If a home is being used in a manner as an 8-bedroom house, then the reasonable accommodation would say it should, if it doesn't hurt the city, and if it doesn't change, ultimately impact the city any more than it already was, then a reasonable accommodation would be given to continue to use it in that way, even though the people do not strictly fit the definition of a family.
All right. So what would be objection 1? That you just listed 2 things that does it hurt the city? How could your housing hurt the city?
It cannot hurt the city. So I don't see how it impacts the city any more than the other use, the existing use, which was as a 8-bedroom home, or the other neighbors in the residential A zone. There are a number of other homes that have as much of an impact, and when I say impact, I mean a use impact. So the home next to me is a bed and breakfast, and they have, I believe, 6 rooms. Maybe with the owner's quarters, I don't know what it is. Maybe it's 8 or 9 beds. Is it more or less impactful? It's about the same.
So do they have a reasonable use clause to that bed and breakfast?
There's an exception for bed and breakfast, so they probably did not need to get that exception. But exceptions were granted, and again, this isn't what...
Wait, we'll back up a second.
Sure.
Exceptions were granted for what property?
Oh, for other properties in the neighborhood. So this is not where my case lies in asking for the reasonable accommodation. But in fact, if we look at the neighborhood, there are a number of attorneys' offices that clearly were granted an exception at some point because it is a residential A area. There are, as I did a brief survey, and we did do a survey of the immediate homes in the residential A area within 2 blocks of my house, over 40% of those are either multifamily homes, single families that have been converted, or multi-use homes converted to more than one housing unit, or they are, in fact, businesses.
I noticed,
doctors, lawyers.
I drove down Hawthorne Street the other day to take a look. There are, you just brought it up, doctor offices, physician facilities, and lawyer offices. How many, have you done any research to figure out how many law offices are within a couple of blocks of where your house is at 49 Hawthorne?
We did, in fact. I don't have the exact numbers here, but there are over half a dozen law offices within a few blocks and within the residential A.
How about 5? How about 5 in a 2-block radius?
Absolutely.
So what does that mean to the whole residential aspect of this?
Well, I question whether or not the argument that we don't fit in because of their strictly residential nature is a valid argument. And again, it's not what my belief why we fit in, because I in fact believe that my use is strictly residential, that it's a group of men acting as a family and living in, acting as one unit. So I believe we fit in more than most of these exceptions.
Stephen Sheldon is our guest at the meeting in question a couple of weeks ago, about 2 weeks ago to yesterday, right?
That's right.
Brian Gomes, City Council President, was there. Do you remember what he said about the neighborhood?
I don't have his exact quote.
I'll give you one of them.
The house, the area is not the right place.
He says it's not the right place. I guess it's Gomesville, because it's his city. So he would know if it's the right place or not the right place.
Well, so is an attorney's office or a doctor's office or a nursing home, or for that matter, a school, is that more residential than 8 men choosing to live together? I leave it to people to answer. I don't know.
508-996-0500. Toll free 877-996-1420. Steve Sheldon in the studio. Your calls coming up next. Welcome back to Brian's Beat. Before I take your calls, this will be really quick, so just hold tight. Kathleen from the Standard Times did speak to an attorney, an independent zoning and land use lawyer who is based outside the city of New Bedford. Matthew Watsky says, the question hinges on whether the residents of the home come together to rent the building as a single family. And he says if residents share the common areas and have separate rentals of bedrooms, that would not appear to be a single family use consistent with the zoning definitions. Steve Sheldon?
Yeah, I don't. The fact is that the house will be rented. That's a single-family house, is one unit, but that's not my understanding of the case law. Nor I believe what he's. Nor is it clear exactly what he's referring to. I believe when he states the details there, he's saying that it is a lodging house. And there's some clear case law in Massachusetts by the SJC, the Supreme Judicial Court, around this and defining what makes up a lodging house. And if that's what he's referring to, it's clear that this type of use is not a lodging house.
508-996-0500. Thank you for your patience. Welcome to Brian's Beat. You're on with Steve Sheldon.
How are you doing, Mr. Sheldon?
Hi there.
Well, you're very well cased and very well versed in case law. I think people have the perception here that you live in Newton and you generally are pimping out the poorer cities with the vices and social problems. We're trying to reverse that, sir. You live in Newton. Open your house up to a sober house, sir. Let your neighbors experience the blessings that you project into the community. You put this in a very nice area of the city. A lot of people are disgusted with it. They're trying to build the area up. And, we do have social problems in our country, in our cities, in our suburbs. It's not only doesn't strike the poor. It not only strikes the poor, it strikes the rich. But I think the planning in that area, I think it's wrong, and I think it should be more in a commercial, industrial area, not smack right in a residential area. And I think that's just people's concerns about that.
Would you like his response?
Yeah, sure.
All right. Thank you for your call.
Yeah, it's the use really is a residential use. There is no zoning, nor would it be appropriate to put this type of a home in a commercial or an industrial area.
There seems to be a stigma because of the, quote, sober people that will live there. I don't think this ever comes up if 8 people are just going to live under the roof. It may never come up with the conversations that you've had with any of the neighbors.
Absolutely. And part of this is people's stigma of it being a sober house or some type of facility. It's not, and it is residential in use. And there just wouldn't be any mechanism, even if one wanted to do this, to put a house like this in a strip mall or in an industrial warehouse area. It's not only is there not a mechanism to do it, it would be unreasonable to expect that we would want or to be a healthy environment for people to live.
The caller brought up, my brain just froze. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to try to remember, and I'm going to go on to the next caller. Hello.
Good morning.
Morning.
When I vote for my elected officials and they get sworn in, they raise their hand to uphold the law. In the city of New Bedford, we have zoning laws, and this particular project, notwithstanding the goodness or the negativity that some people may have regarding it, would violate the zoning laws because of the family issue. The letter that you're talking about may bode well in a court of law after a situation with a zoning board, which should be a next step, and that would be a variance. You've talked about the neighborhood with lawyers' offices and bed and breakfasts and things of that nature, but all those folks went to the zoning board to get a variance because the zoning laws in the area would allow that. The zoning board cleared them and gave them the variance, and I think the same process should apply to you. The letter that you're talking about for accommodation simply is an attempt to usurp the zoning laws by way of not having a variance hearing. So, in my opinion, that should be the next step. What do you feel about applying for a variance for your project?
I don't believe that the letter is usurping it. It's in fact, it's working within the zoning laws, and because the zoning doesn't have any accommodation for a sober house or for any type of house for.
But you're violating the zoning laws by proposing what you're proposing because these people aren't related. That's the simple part of this whole thing. And in order to accommodate you, you would apply for a variance, no?
Yeah, I don't believe I am. If I open the house, I'd be violating the zoning laws. I haven't. I've chosen to wait and go through the legal process of applying to the town. It's up to the town to respond. If they respond to my reasonable accommodation letter and they say no, then I can choose what my next step will be. But I'm not going to open the house until the town approves it.
Well, the city can invite you to apply for a variance, no? Wouldn't that be the correct part of the process rather than all this back and forth that we're going? Because, in my opinion, the city council is doing the correct thing because they have looked at this and said, well, wait a minute, this proposal is in violation of the zoning laws. So we can't support this. But the gentleman, as you say, if you're asking for a letter of accommodation to be sent to the city, the response from the city would simply be come to the zoning board and maybe apply for a variance so that your project would get approval of the city. And that's why I vote for people when they raise their hand to uphold the law.
He makes a good point. Thank you for your call. I think there are probably two ways you can go. You decided to take the particular route that you did. On whether I'm talking about in a town like I'm used to living in or in a city where you're talking councilors or selectmen, I expect them to uphold the laws, but I also expect them to look at all of the laws. And case law would be a form of law, just like there's a zoning. Obviously, what you're going through and have seen happen over the years is that zoning laws could say one thing, but reasonable accommodation seems to trump it, which would be on the state and on the federal level. Am I correct?
And in many cases on the city and town level. So there are many towns who actually have a reasonable accommodation procedure in place. New Bedford is not one of them. If they had it in place, I would be going through that process.
508-996-0500. Let us continue. Hello.
I don't really like this not in my backyard thing. If this was on Roosevelt Street, there wouldn't be a big cry about it from anybody in New Bedford. Or like when they put stepping stones on Pleasant Street, was there a big cry then?
That precedes me. I don't know if there was a cry or not, but I hear what you're saying. Nobody cares on streets that aren't that, let's say, financially well-to-do.
Or, yeah, if you put it in a drug... Is that a good thing to put a sober house in a drug-infested neighborhood? Wouldn't you want it to be someplace that they'd be away from that type of stuff?
Absolutely. The goal is to have it in a residential setting and as quiet and peaceful setting as possible.
Right. So that seems to me like a good place to put it.
Thank you for your call. I do appreciate it. That's an interesting thought. Do you want folks to be in an area that are practicing sobriety now, in an area where certainly you can drive up and down particular streets and see that there is activity going on. When I say activity, I'll be more specific. You can see people sitting out on the stoop drinking. You can see dealers coming up to cars and, putting out one hand to shake and putting a bag of something in the other hand, and off the street they go. Is that the neighborhood how would that work for a house like what you're doing?
It clearly wouldn't, and it would be irresponsible to open up this type of home in that type of neighborhood.
508-996-0500. So basically, you have one person saying that it's not right for the particular area. I can remember growing up as a kid. Well, here you go, Brian, when you were a kid. Yeah, I can remember growing up as a kid. And we wanted to move, my mom wanted to move to a particular area, and it wasn't right for black people to live in that type of area. Is it like that today? Absolutely not. Well, maybe there are a certain few areas in the country where it is like that. But it's not like that anymore. Why should it be any different for what it is that you're trying to do?
It shouldn't. And the area, any residential area should be open to this type of housing. And the courts have upheld that, in fact, it should be. And that's what we want to do.
So why are you trying to railroad this project into a nice neighborhood?
It's the argument you just made. It's not railroading it into a nice neighborhood. It's a residential neighborhood. It's where these homes belong. This is the nicest house that these men can afford. And that's how I chose it.
Okay, let me try a different way. I mentioned to you there are about 5 law offices in that neighborhood. Why not get some type of zoning variance and convert it into law offices?
It's not my business.
Speak to that.
My business is opening and running these homes. I think it's a worthwhile business. It gives the men a chance to live in a house that they normally would not be able to live in. It gives them a chance to have a stable period of their life during their long-term recovery for a couple of years, typically. And for me as a landlord, it's a better tenant.
Let's speak to that. You own multiple properties. You're not a rookie in the landlord business. You've done tenant and toilets for how many years?
Over 25 years.
Over 25 years. How does this type of tenant, again, only for 6 or 7 months, compare to normal tenants, normal rentals that you've been doing for a couple of decades?
Yeah, let me speak to the time period that we usually keep them. A national average is 7 months. Massachusetts Better Roman Home, maybe part of an association, is closer to 12 months. I'm actually hoping to keep the folks, because of my model, because their homes are nice, for about 2 years.
2 years compared to 7 months.
Right.
That's better than most rentals in other areas. I won't say for the single family area of Hawthorne Street.
Right. My turnover is much more frequent in my apartments. I own apartment buildings. And the tenants, there's issues with rent payment, with drugs, with alcohol, with all sorts of issues with damage to the apartments. It doesn't happen with these guys. These guys are motivated. They're working. They're required to. Their rent is paid on time. And they don't do drugs, and they don't do alcohol.
Well, I suppose someone could say to you, instead of doing the type of housing that you want, let normal tenants live there who might do drugs, who might drink alcohol. What would you say to that?
I don't see the benefit to the neighborhood or to myself.
Well, I guess the neighborhood doesn't mind if people are drinking and maybe doing drugs. I mean, because they're worried about people practicing sobriety. And how many of, again, 6-7 month period, how many of your tenants have fallen off the wagon?
I've had 2 fall off. So there's 2 in that period of time. And I spoke to this before. This is what it looks like when someone falls off. I get a phone call in one of the cases saying I've had a drink. We get them into a program somewhere. They recuperate, and we may or may not take them back depending on how they do within that program. And that's the extent of it. It doesn't, I'm not saying it can't. There's no absolutes here. But it hasn't affected my house, and I am part of an association of ADF housing, of other people who own this type of housing. And it's not typical that this affects the house. These people respect where they live. They respect the other men who they support. And this peer-supported housing has such great benefits that when someone falls off, they know what their next step is, and it's to go get help elsewhere.
I recall from that Tuesday evening, there were people concerned that you're going to be an absentee landlord, and certainly there are problem properties in the city of New Bedford to the point that there is a problem properties ordinance. If you're going to be up in Newton, you're certainly not going to be caring for your properties. What's your response to that concern?
One doesn't need to live in the town that they own properties. I own properties in Lowell and Worcester and Lawrence, and I don't need to live next door to the properties to maintain my properties in excellent condition. I have maintenance staff. I also visit my properties on a regular basis, and the people who suggest that you need to be a owner-occupied landlord, it's just the numbers just don't pan out. It's not. There are landlords everywhere who don't live in a building. You don't need to be an owner-occupied landlord to have a decent house.
Let's talk money. Caller earlier today said that maybe you should do this in Newton, in your property in Newton. Is that a financially feasible proposition?
It's not financially feasible because the men could not afford, or women, could not afford to live in a property in Newton. There are actually sober homes in Newton, and so to speak to the need, there are typically sober homes where there's a need. These homes have been opened up for a number of years. If someone tried to buy property today, they would have to charge each person what amounts to $600 or $700 a week, and it just wouldn't be affordable for most people.
So why New Bedford then?
Because there's a need and because it's affordable.
There's a need. Does that mean that people aren't going to be coming from the Worcesters, from Springfield into your property, or are you looking to be homegrown here?
It is very rare for someone to choose. So people who are living in ADF housing in a home like this are people from that city. People are voluntarily living there. They're not mandated in any way. They're paying their own rent. So it's people who are choosing to live there, which means they have roots in the community. It's very rare, and I don't have anyone in any of my houses who are not from that specific community. So the guys from Worcester in that house have lived in Worcester for many years, have family in Worcester, work in Worcester. Same with Lowell, same with Lawrence, and I'm assuming it'll be the same in New Bedford.
Have you started the process, and how is the process matriculated as far as finding tenants for the area?
I have not. So I am not doing anything with the home. I am not going to open it. I'm not going to look for tenants until I get an approval from the city and go through whatever legal channels the city would like me to go through. So I'm going slow, and I'm going through the process.
If I recall the other evening, there was at least one counselor who complained that you did not go through the process. You were trying to usurp the process. Your response to that?
My response is I haven't opened up, and I am going through the process.
You didn't talk to the counselors at first.
It's not required that I did, but the fact is that they gave me a cease and desist shortly after I purchased the property while I was painting it. And I wasn't given an opportunity to talk to the counselors. It is, in fact, my normal order of operation would be to buy the property, to start the construction process, to go talk to the chief of police, and the zoning or planning board department, and let them know what I'm doing. It typically doesn't require anything more than that, because most cities, we don't get the same kind of response we did in New Bedford. But that would have been what I did here, but I was given a cease and desist, and that was stopped very, very soon after I purchased it.
Why do you talk to the chief of police?
We want to put everyone on notice what we're doing. So I think it's a responsible part of the community to let people know what's happening.
There is a changing of the guard here in the city of New Bedford when it comes to the chief of police. Are you going to wait until you get some type of an official notice from the building inspector or whomever your reasonable accommodation request went through, or will you sometime this week, next week, try to talk to the new police chief to let them know, as if they don't already know what you're up to?
I don't have any specific plans to talk to him, but certainly before we open, I would speak to him.
Fair enough. Anything you'd like to add to our program today?
No, thank you for having me in.
Oh, there is one other question. It came up from David Lima, who's very big in the community, works with homeless folks, etc. He did bring up something that I think you need to respond to, and that would be you're not going to have any services at the home. And because you're not having services, you're going to be collecting state and federal monies and living off of that. Would you please respond to that?
Again, all of this is paid directly by residents, just like renting any other apartment. There is no state, federal money. I don't apply for grants. It is a private business, and it is not in any way do we take any money from any government source.
Stephen Sheldon, thank you again for coming in. We probably won't speak until after the holidays, but I want you to definitely keep me abreast of what happens with this request and where you're going to go from here.
Great, thank you.
Thank you for coming in. Thanks for bringing your son. We do have, I believe it's Ellen today with the Talk Radio News Service coming up.